Police say this does not appear to be a murder-suicide. And opening statements are underway in the criminal trial for a former Uvalde school police officer. Adrian Gonzales was one of the first of nearly 400 officers to respond to the Robb Elementary School shooting that killed 19 children and 2 teachers. Law enforcement ultimately took 77 minutes to act and kill the shooter. Prosecutors say Gonzales ignored his training and failed to engage, distract, or delay the shooter. He's pleading not guilty to 29 counts of child endangerment, and his lawyers argue he's a scapegoat for a broader law enforcement failure. Our Peter Charalambous is there in Corpus Christi, and let's also bring in ABC legal analyst Brian Buckmire for more on this case. Hi to you both. So, Peter, what's the latest on these opening statements?
Yeah, so at this moment right now, the jury is hearing a really emotional opening statement from the prosecutor in this case. He actually began to cry as he started his opening statement, and he's laying out the theory of the prosecution case. This is the first time we're hearing that. Prosecutors have been very tight-lipped about this case. He alleges that the defendant here, Adrian Gonzales, basically got advance warning, that someone warned him before the shooter even entered the school, and despite that, he failed to do his duty. He failed to confront the gunman. He failed to do the basic steps that his training taught him to do in such a situation.
Brian, a Florida sheriff's deputy was acquitted of responsibility related to the 2018 Parkland school shooting. How important of a precedent does that case set for this one?
I would say it's somewhat important, and I say somewhat because it is a different case. There may be apples and oranges in terms of the position, information that was given to the officer and what they ultimately did. Here, I think the defense is going to be laser focused on 2 things. One, whether or not this officer has a duty to these children inside of the school in the same way that I might have a duty to my child, or that a caregiver would have to a child as well. The other thing they're going to see is whether or not the information that was provided to him, the training that he was given, and whether or not his actions following that were appropriate based on what he was given. It's going to be a lot of questioning in terms of, like, is this Monday morning quarterbacking appropriate, or was this officer doing what was appropriate based on his information and training?
Brian, how high is the bar to get a conviction in a case like this?
So a case like this, from a legal standard, is the same as every other case. It's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But there are some underlying elements, I would say, in a case like this that make it a little bit more different. This is not an officer who's at a command post making decisions as to where people move. This is an officer who was on the ground inside the school, and probably one of the more traumatic incidences of his career, or even any law enforcement officer's career, that being an active shooter inside of a school. And so now you're asking everyday laypersons to look at this scenario with very gruesome photos and facts of this case and say, okay, you should have done this, you should have done that, this is where you went wrong, or this is where you went right, and ultimately come to a decision of, did you prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt?
And Peter, former Uvalde Schools Police Chief Pete Arredondo is also charged. His trial date hasn't been set yet. How do you think his case could factor into this one?
Yeah, that's a great point, because at the end of the day, Peter Arredondo was the police chief. He was the person in charge on the day of the shooting, while Adrian Gonzales was just a police officer with the school police department. And I think that's going to be part of the defense. They're going to point out the fact that Adrian Gonzales was one of many officers. And we even heard that during the jury selection process yesterday. You heard potential jurors who were eventually dismissed basically criticize why not all the other nearly 400 police officers, why they're not sitting there with Adrian Gonzales today, because this was a broader law enforcement failure. So I think they're going to highlight the fact that Pete Arredondo was in charge that day and that Adrian Gonzales was just taking orders.
All right, Pete Charalambous, Brian Buckmire, thank you both.